photograph is the delicate balance of shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. These are the camera settings that come together to emphasize an aesthetic, create a style, to make the image. Timing, depth of field, light sensitivity. All three are equally important. But in order to balance these camera settings, you must prioritize the exposure trinity in a way that best presents your subject. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to show each individual camera setting and the way that it affects an image. First up, shutter speed. Shutter speed is the measured time of an image, the moment between the opening and the closing of the camera shutter. We've got Jake here in a very windy environment. His hair is going everywhere. To freeze this motion, we need to use a very high or fast shutter speed. But if we want to emphasize motion blur of the hair, we'll want to do just the opposite. A low or slow shutter speed will give us the opposite effect. So, the higher or faster the shutter speed, the more likely you'll be able to freeze action. The lower or slower the shutter speed, the more likely you'll be to blur the motion. Next up, aperture. Aperture is the size of the hole that lets light into the camera. Here we have a very nice portrait setup for Jake. By changing our aperture, we're able to specify how much of our lovely subject stays in focus. Shooting at a larger aperture like f2.8, the smaller the number, the larger the hole, creates a very narrow area of focus. Stopping the aperture down to say f20, the larger the number, the smaller the hole, gives us greater depth of field with more of the subject and background in focus. The larger the f-stop, the more shallow the depth of field. The smaller the aperture, the more overall focus in the image. Third, ISO. ISO is the chosen light sensitivity of the film or sensor. It's Jake again, in a room with ample light. Shooting at a lower sensitivity, like ISO 200, should be fine here. Highlights and shadow detail are clean and virtually without noise. But when the lights go down, we'll need to raise the sensitivity to make an exposure. Employing a higher ISO allows us to make photographs in this challenging scene, but it also introduces noise to the image, particularly in the mid-tone and shadow areas. So choose lower ISOs in bright or well-lit scenarios, and choose higher ISOs in dark or poorly lit situations. Shutter speed, aperture, ISO, all three are equally important, but you can only start with one. If you want to make a photograph of something fast-moving, you want to freeze the action, you need to shoot with a higher shutter speed. Aperture and ISO, they'll follow. If you'd like to make a photograph with a shallow depth of field, open your aperture up. Shutter speed and ISO, they come later. If you're in a dark situation, raise your ISO up, then set the aperture and shutter speed accordingly. For more on exposure photography and all things imaging, visit B&H. I'm photographer David Flores. See you next time.